Brock Lesnor didn't just cross over from WWE to MMA. He crash landed like a Viking war god with a skull tattoo. When the next big thing showed up in the UFC, it felt like the final boss from SmackDown vs. Raw had been copy-pasted into real life. He looked like he'd been grown in a lab using elk meat, diesel fuel, and unresolved rage. And everyone, including seasoned MMA fans, thought he was going to get humbled fast, except he didn't. After a brief MMA warm-up where he folded his first opponent like a lawn chair, Lesnar got signed to the UFC and immediately thrown into a debut against Frank Mir, a literal submission wizard who, by all accounts, should have tapped Brock like a snare drum. And to be fair, he did. But not before Brock suplexed him across the cage and nearly broke time itself with ground and pound. Still, Mir snatched a knee bar and Lesnar tapped. The internet cheered. The wrestler got exposed. That was supposed to be the story, except again, it wasn't. Brock came back. Fast, smashing Heath Herring, taking his giant cowboy hat, and riding that momentum into a title fight against Randy Couture. Yes, that Couture, the ageless legend, fighting genius, all-around MMA grandpa who had seen it all. Lesnar was still learning how to jab. He was 3 fights into his career, and he knocked Randy out like he was swatting a balloon. Just like that, Brock Lesnar, former fake fighting champion, was now the real UFC heavyweight champion. And that's not even the crazy part. The crazy part is he defended it. Twice. Against actual monsters. He avenged his loss to Frank Mir by smashing him like a man trying to erase a memory. He survived getting battered by Shane Carwin for an entire round, only to come back, wrestle him into the dirt, and choke him out like a villain in a training montage. Then came the fall, literally from the inside. Brock got diverticulitis. His intestines basically turned against him. He had a foot of colon removed, which sounds like a saw trap. When he came back, he looked slower, shakier. He lost to Cain Velasquez, then to Overeem. He briefly returned years later at UFC 200, won a decision over Mark Hunt, then flunked a drug test and got the win overturned. Oops. But despite all that, Lesnar's MMA run is insane. The guy went from WWE scripted brawls to being the baddest man on the planet in under 5 fights. Nobody's done that before or since. He brought millions of eyeballs, broke PPV records, and beat actual killers, while still looking like a farmer who could suplex a bear out of sheer boredom. Brock didn't just survive in the UFC, he left a crater. Bobby Lashley. If Brock Lesnar was the heavyweight sledgehammer who kicked in the UFC's front door, Bobby Lashley was the guy who politely used the side entrance, quietly built an extension, and casually went 15-2 while nobody was looking. Lashley had all the tools. NCAA wrestling pedigree? Check. Physique that looks like it was carved out of regret and creatine? Double check. He debuted in WWE with a rocket push and enough traps to store snacks in. Then, like Brock, he dipped out of the wrestling circus and wandered into the world of actual violence. Except unlike Brock, Bobby didn't get the UFC red carpet treatment. There was no fast tracking, no main events, just a slow grind through the weird back roads of regional MMA. He won his first MMA fight in 41 seconds, then won 4 more. People started noticing, hey, isn't that the guy who represented Trump at WrestleMania? Yes, it is, but also, he's a dude who could double leg you into the parking lot and still have enough cardio left to run a 5K. The most frustrating part, Bobby Lashley was actually good. His wrestling translated, he had power, patience, and control, but he never quite made it to the UFC. Whether it was timing, politics, or just bad luck, he fought mostly in smaller promotions, with the highest profile stint being in Bellator. There, he kept winning, sometimes against guys who looked like they'd been pulled from a Gold's Gym parking lot, sure, but also against legitimate competition. Still, the knock on Lashley was always this: he never fought anyone elite. No top 10 killers, no UFC mainstays. He was splitting time between pro wrestling and MMA, and it showed. You can't serve 2 masters when one of them is trying to punch your soul out of your face. But to his credit, Bobby never pretended he was chasing UFC gold. He just kept his head down, kept winning, and casually stacked up one of the most quietly successful crossover careers in MMA history. He didn't get the fame Brock got, didn't get the belts, but Lashley did something arguably more impressive. He stuck around. Over a decade of fights, consistent wins, and almost no scandals, meltdowns, or highlight reel losses, the dude's MMA career is like a workman's lunchbox. Nothing flashy, but everything you need to get the job done. If Lesnar was the explosion, Lashley was the pressure, steady, controlled, and never quite getting the respect he probably deserved. Jake Hagar. Jake Hagar, better known in WWE as Jack Swagger, the All-American American with the lisp and the eagle pose, made one of the strangest transitions into MMA history. Not because it was especially bad or good, but because it just sort of happened. No massive promotional blitz, no UFC debut, no screaming Paul Heyman. Just Jake, a singlet, and some deeply questionable matchmaking. Hagar's MMA career began in 2019 with Bellator, and from the jump, it was clear they weren't exactly feeding him to the wolves. They were feeding him to the career accountants and amateur kickboxers of the regional scene. His first opponent was so outmatched, he probably found out the fight was happening that morning. Hagar took him down instantly and choked him out before the guy even had time to Google sprawl. His second fight, same story. Early takedown, submission win, all wrapped up in under 2 minutes. Bellator was out here booking fights like they were managing a museum exhibit. Do not disturb the wrestler. He will maul you. And yet, even with the softballs, Hagar somehow made things weird. His third fight ended in a no contest after he landed multiple groin strikes, which, if you're keeping score at home, is not how you build momentum in a fight career. Not unless your game plan is make them sterile, then make them tap. Still, the man never technically lost. He went undefeated at 3-0-1, which, yes, is technically better than CM Punk, but also technically worse than most gym teachers. His fourth and final bout ended in a split decision, and afterward he slowly faded from the MMA spotlight like a background extra in a Netflix show. Part of the problem, Hagar never fully committed. He was still doing pro wrestling gigs while training and fighting, basically trying to juggle headlocks and heel hooks in the same calendar. That's fine if you're padding your legacy or proving a point, but it's hard to take someone seriously in a cage when they're cutting promos in the same month. The thing is, Jake Hagar could fight. NCAA credentials, solid grappling, good size. He had tools, but the whole package just never fully clicked. He didn't push for bigger fights, didn't chase elite opponents, and didn't make much noise beyond his debut. He showed up, punched a few part-timers, and rode off into AEW. At the end of the day, Hagar's MMA career is like gas station sushi. Technically not a disaster, but absolutely not something anyone was clamoring for. Bam Bigelow. Bam Bigelow looked like he was born for violence. Tattooed skull, 390 pounds of fast twitch fury, a man who could moonsault better than half the cruiserweights and still looked like he could eat your ribcage. In pro wrestling, Bam was terrifying in all the right ways, but in MMA, he lasted about as long as a sneeze. In 1996, right after leaving WWE and at the tail end of his pro wrestling peak, Bam decided it was time to give real fighting a shot. Unfortunately, he didn't try to ease into it. No warm-up fights, no tune-up opponents. He jumped straight into the deep end against Kimo Leopoldo, a Taekwondo black belt, UFC veteran, and an actual trained fighter with muscles that looked like they had their own muscles. It took about 10 seconds for everyone to realize this was a bad idea. Bam got taken down almost immediately. No resistance, no sprawl, just splat. From there, it was less a fight and more a one-sided grappling demonstration where the only technique Bam had was try not to get choked unconscious. Kimo eventually locked in an armbar and Bigelow tapped. The whole thing lasted just over 2 minutes, shorter than most of his ring entrances in WWE, and that was it. One and done. No rematch, no second camp, no statement. According to wrestling lore, Bam later claimed he was paid a massive sum to lose the fight, or that he thought it would be more like a worked match. And honestly, you want to believe that, because watching a man who once headlined WrestleMania get ragdolled like a backyard folding chair is a rough way to go. What makes it worse is how little anyone remembers this. Bam was a legit star in pro wrestling, beloved, respected, influential. But in MMA, he's a trivia footnote, a cautionary tale of what happens when you take pro wrestling toughness into a cage and hope it translates. And look, we love Bam, but if there was ever a clearer example of don't try this at home or in a sanctioned combat sport, this was it. Dave Batista, 6-time world champion, destroyer of turnbuckles, and future guardian of the galaxy, decided in 2012 that before saving the universe, he wanted to test himself in the one place where CGI muscles don't help, the MMA cage. Now, to his credit, Batista didn't just tweet out some motivational quote and vanish. He trained. He got into real shape, well, different shape. Less pro wrestling oil slick monster, more jacked up gym dad who brings his own chalk. He signed with CES MMA, a regional promotion that sounds like it sells home security systems, and headlined their first ever pay-per-view. That's how famous he was. Zero MMA experience, still the main event. His opponent, a man named Vince Lucero, who looked like he'd just come off a double shift at Buffalo Wild Wings. To be fair, Lucero had over 40 pro fights and a background in not falling over, but standing across from Batista, he looked like a forklift operator fighting a comic book character. Then the fight started, and things got weird. It was sloppy. Both guys were gassed in about 90 seconds. Most of the action was them clinching against the cage like two uncles arguing over the last beer. Batista eventually muscled Lucero to the ground and started unloading short, awkward punches, many of which, let's be honest, were directly to the back of the head. The ref didn't say much. Maybe he was just a big Drax fan. Eventually, Lucero curled up, the punches kept coming, and the fight was stopped. Batista had done it. One fight, one win, 100% undefeated, and it was technically a success, but nobody left that arena thinking Batista was the next big thing in MMA. It looked like what it was, a 43-year-old wrestling star testing the waters and realizing the pool was colder than expected. He said afterward that he planned to keep fighting. Then Marvel called, and shockingly, Batista chose to make millions of dollars and become a movie star instead of grinding his way through small town fight cards for a shot at Bellator prelims. Smart move, honestly. So yeah, Batista's MMA run wasn't impressive, but he showed up, he got the W, and he didn't completely embarrass himself, which already puts him miles ahead of what's coming next on this list. CM Punk. CM Punk's MMA career was like watching a car try to enter a NASCAR race from the parking lot. Noble in spirit, but doomed by physics. He went from pipe bombs to pipe dreams, chasing real combat glory in a sport where confidence tattoos don't count for takedown defense. After walking out of WWE in 2014 with a body held together by sarcasm and spite, Punk announced he was joining the UFC. Not amateur circuits, not the regionals, not Bellator. The UFC. Imagine quitting your office job and applying directly for CEO of SpaceX. That was the energy. To his credit, Punk did the work, or at least as much work as a 37-year-old with zero prior experience could manage. He trained under Duke Roufus in Milwaukee, put in rounds, took beatings, posed for some gritty black and white gym photos, but no amount of gym sweat could prepare him for what happened at UFC 203 in Cleveland. Enter Mickey Gall, a young, hungry fighter with an actual ground game and zero chill. The fight lasted 2 minutes and 14 seconds, and about 2 minutes of that was Punk getting ragdolled like a crash test dummy. Gall took him down within seconds, smashed him with punches, and choked him out with a rear naked like he was submitting a bar tab. Punk didn't land a single meaningful strike. It was like watching someone try to fistfight a washing machine. Dana White, who had done everything short of putting CM Punk's face on a championship belt pre-fight, immediately said afterward that Punk probably shouldn't fight in the UFC again. So, naturally, Punk fought in the UFC again. His second bout came 2 years later at UFC 225 against Mike Jackson, another low-level pro brought in to make this vaguely look like a fair fight. Punk actually survived all 3 rounds, but he looked like he was moving through a swamp while Jackson calmly jabbed and smirked his way to a decision win. It wasn't competitive, it wasn't violent, it was just sad. Years later, that loss was overturned to a no contest because Jackson tested positive for weed, which is the most CM Punk way to not lose a fight, getting saved by someone else's failed vibes. In total, Punk went 0. Won with 1 no contest in the UFC. No wins, no highlights, just 2 fights, infinite memes, and a permanent place in MMA's What Were We Thinking file. But here's the weird thing. He tried. He didn't fake it. He didn't duck training. He walked into the cage knowing full well he might get humiliated, and he did, twice. But he took the beating like a man, never blamed anyone, and walked away with his dignity mostly intact, if not his orbital bone. Respect to the effort, mourn the execution. Giant Silva. Giant Silva's MMA career felt less like a legitimate athletic endeavor and more like a side quest from a fighting game. Standing over 7 feet tall with a WWE past and the mobility of a malfunctioning animatronic, Silva was basically MMA's final boss, if the final boss was extremely slow and easy to hit. In WWE, Silva was part of the human oddities, which tells you everything you need to know. He was there to be large, wear tie-dye, and look like someone forgot to adjust the character proportions and create a wrestler mode. But once his wrestling days dwindled, he took his talents, or at least his limbs, to MMA. Why? Still unclear. Possibly on a dare. He fought mostly in Pride FC, which to its credit had a rich history of giving gigantic men terrifyingly real fights. Silva's first opponent was Kazuyuki Fujita, who punched him in the head until the ref stopped it. Pretty standard stuff. Then Silva won a fight, which surprised everyone, including himself. But after that, it was a rapid descent. Silva went on to lose 5 of his next 6 fights, all within the first round. His fights often looked like someone trying to push over a refrigerator that punches back. He was big, sure, but also slow, gassy by round 1, and incapable of defending against basic grappling. If you wanted to beat Giant Silva, your best strategy was to move. Just move at all. It wasn't all his fault. Carrying that much mass into a cage is like fighting in a suit of armor filled with sandbags. Silva was an attraction, not a technician. He was booked because people wanted to see the contrast, the David versus Goliath setups. Except in this case, Goliath didn't know how to sprawl and David had black belts. His final win came against a sumo wrestler named Akabono, who was roughly the same size and shape as Silva, which made the whole thing look like 2 Zords trying to clinch. Silva technically finished his career with a 2-6 record, and while it wasn't the worst MMA run by a pro wrestler, it sure was the slowest. If nothing else, Giant Silva's MMA career proved that size may be intimidating, but without skill, stamina, or a functioning gas tank, it's just more surface area to get punched.